Good morning, everybody. Apologies for starting late. I will now call to order the Delaware County Board of Elections meeting for September 27th, 2022. And with that call, let's all please stand to pledge allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And Shana Tova to everybody who's observing the Happy New Year. I apologize. We actually did not, we would not have necessarily intended to schedule this meeting on the second day of Rosh Hashanah if we had consciously recognized that fact. So my apologies to anybody that this inconvenience is. All right, we're going to start with the approval of the minutes. I have reviewed them. They were circulated by Mr. Allen, I think earlier this week or last week. Mr. McBlain, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I would move to approve the minutes of the previous meeting.
Of the previous meeting, thank you. I second that motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, with that, that is approved. Mr. Allen, could you please review the consideration of the agenda?
There are 3 action items today. All involve the polling place reassignments. First, Chester Heights Borough. Secondly, Aston 1. And thirdly, Darby Township 3-1. If there are people here from Chester Heights again, I would recommend that we move that item up to immediately following public comment so that we could go from public comment directly into that item for the sake of the people who are here for that item.
And I do think I see several people who spoke on that issue last time, so we will move that up to the beginning of public comment. Just want to tell everybody, given the length of the meeting last time, we've tried to reformat things a little bit differently to be more efficient. We'll see if it works. And that is that we are going to hold the public comment much like County Council does at the very beginning of the meeting. And that is why Mr. Allen specifically announced the action items so that if anybody wants to speak to those action items, I would encourage you to do it at the public comment session. There will also be a general open public comment, so you're not required to speak to the action items. But the public comment itself will only be held at the beginning of this meeting. And so with that, if there's no further ado, I think we should start with public comment, but let's start with the Chester Heights issue. So I don't know who wants to speak first, but anybody who'd like to come forward, please do. Please come forward, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Gloria Ann Ellis. I live at 146 Logtown Road in Chester Heights. I'm the judge of elections for the borough of Chester Heights. And I just want to say that though the middle school has served its purpose, every time we have people come in from the borough, they say, why do we have to drive 5 miles to go to a place to vote? It's inconvenient. People walk 100 yards in the parking lot because there's parking between the school buses. They had originally told us they would move the school buses to someplace else, and they never did. So you're parking between school buses all day long while you're trying to get in to park, and it's really not a convenient place. And we do have a place in Chester Heights we have now found that I think would work very well for the people to vote in the borough.
Well, thank you for your service as judge of election. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I didn't have to say it then, but I do want to, Mr. Solicitor, would you just please keep an eye on the clock for everybody has 3 minutes to speak during public comment. Okay, Ms. Driscoll.
Marta Driscoll, 458A Lanai Road, Chester Heights. I am a member of council in Chester Heights. I'm also the vice chair for Chester Heights for the Garnet Valley Democratic Committee. So I am here to ask that you please retain the polling place at Garnet Valley Middle School. And if we ignore the fact that the proposed place is accessible through only one side of Baltimore Pike, if we ignore the fact that it's a private building versus a public building, the space itself does not allow for a single poll watcher or an election board member to view the entire space. At the September 13th meeting, I believe after I left, you may have heard some folks discuss the integrity of the election here in Delaware County. And the concern is that Chester Heights has a lot of voters. 2,300 or more voters, over 1,000 of them on average between in-person in general elections. So, and our margins are razor thin. The mayor herself won by 10 votes in 2021. I lost in 2019 by 17 votes. When you walk into the space, you will be met with a fixed permanent conference room table that will, one leaf will be removed, another table will be placed, so somebody will walk in, sign in, walk through one room, sign in at the clerk, walk through a doorway that is about 48 inches max, into another space with affixed tables around the perimeter, a fixed table in the middle. No privacy booth space is allowed there unless we create one. And then that room turns another 90 degrees to another corner. The minority and majority inspector that will be seated in the front will have no view of the other space. The clerk will have to look back to view the other space in order to see what's happening in there. The judge of elections, who I'm assuming would be in the back room along with the machine operator, are both from a single party. As a poll watcher, I would have to follow a voter within a space that's about 5 feet to watch him through the voting process. Or somebody would have to stand in the doorway in order to watch both spaces. I believe that given the political climate we have now and all of the litigation that's happened here in Delaware County and across the country, if somebody from either party on razor-thin margins were to say that there was mistakes happening in Chester Heights, this new location would give them credibility to make those accusations. And I don't want that for Chester Heights. I don't want that for Delaware County. In the school, we have an open gymnasium where one person can view the entire voting process. And I believe that this close to an election, this type of space that is so cut up and is just not conducive to a fair and open election. And I ask and urge that you please consider to keep the election at the Garnet Valley Middle School. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Driscoll. As I mentioned at the last meeting, I don't know, I'm not inside Mr. McBlain's head, but it will be very important to me, the recommendation of our team, the warehouse supervisor and Mr. Allen, I understand, who have all spent some time there, and when they make their recommendation, I think there will be some consideration to all that you said, because of primary importance is the ability for the judge of elections to actually do their job and completely, we have the judge of elections here, completely observe all of the activity as voting occurs. With a desire, I think you expressed this as well, so I'm confident in saying that if we can move a polling place into its municipality, we would like to do that. So I look forward to that report. It's been a really tough issue. Would anybody else like to speak to this issue? I think, Mayor, thank you.
Good morning again. Gina Marie Ellis, 200 Wawa Road. I'm the mayor of Chester Heights. Having heard the objections about location and exactly where in the building voting will happen, I do understand that Mr. Miller and the judge of elections, and I think Marvin was there again last week, reorganizing a space where everything can be seen. And as long as it's big enough, I do think it's incredibly important for our voters to vote in their own borough. I know bipartisan support is incredibly important. There's no bipartisan support to keep it at Garnet Valley Middle School. Really, everyone who comes to vote doesn't want to be there. They're there because they have to be. My understanding was that it was a pandemic change and it was temporary. As soon as we could find a place in Chester Heights, that we would move it back to Chester Heights. We have found a place. It might not be as large as the gigantic gymnasium in the Garnet Valley Middle School. I think our voters are more inclined to stay in town than they are to worry about how big the actual space is. As long as we can satisfy your needs and your requirements for making it a very integrity-full election, having it in our borough is incredibly important to our residents. And I ask that you consider them and know that there really isn't bipartisan support for keeping it at the middle school. I would say it's probably more get it out of the middle school and somehow find a place in Chester Heights. And I don't really, obviously there's not bipartisan support to move it right now. So rather than bipartisan support, what makes the most sense for our voters is what I'd like to have considered.
Thank you. And again, I think there's been a lot of reviews of that location, so I look forward to the report on that. But I appreciate everybody's attention to this because it's so important. Yes, please.
Good morning. Jean Montgomery. I am at 118 Briarcliff Court in Glen Mills, which is in Chester Heights. I'm a newer resident. I do talk to a lot of people in Darlington Woods, and they often have a little confusion about where to vote because it's been changed a few times. I'm all for being in Chester Heights. My only concern is any move at this point in time so close to the election. When I start talking to people, it's usually months ahead, and they said, oh, we still at the church, and I'm like, no, we're not there, we're at the middle school now. So I'm very concerned about anything moving within like 90 days of an election. That's my only concern.
No,
Thank
that's
you.
fair, and I think when we do hear the recommendations, if that consideration to the efforts that we make to make sure that voters are aware of any changes, if that's where we end up, I think that would be important. Please, did somebody else raise their hand? The man in the blue, did you raise your hand? Then, anybody else in Chester Heights? Okay, then you want to speak to the Aston action item? Okay, please come forward. Thank you.
My name is Les Berry, 811 Tryons Road, Aston. I'm a commissioner in Aston. I'm the chairman of the Republican Party in Aston. I just want to take note that Newman University was the original location. It's been that way for 10 years until COVID. I have a list of many people have come to me and say how confusing it is when they go to the community center and there's 2 polling locations. They have to go to one or the other, and it's very confusing. I also talked to the president of Newman, and he wants to do his civic duty, and he likes the idea. There's a lot of clergy, nuns, and students that vote there. It'd be easier for them, and there's also over 55 community very, very close to that. So I'd appreciate if we'd consider moving it back to Newman College.
Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you.
And for the same will be true for Aston. The recommendation of the team will be very important to at least my decision. I'm sure Mr. McBlain's as well. Any other speakers on the polling place assignment action items? Please, sir.
Good morning and thank you. My name's Barry Merlino, 1078 Cedarwood Road in Darby Township. We have found that ever since when COVID started, that when we had to move everybody into the school, that is, although it was a little inconvenient for some of our voters, having people there that could help out in either precinct was very helpful. We already moved 5-1 and 5-2 together. Because we were having a problem with getting a team for 3-1, we thought that we would do the same for the 3-1 and 3-2 going to the church. Once again, it was we really don't feel as if it's really that much inconvenient moving from the firehouse to the church along with the other precinct. And because it is now having almost 3 of our wards together, it also makes it easier for the county to bring equipment in and whatever it takes to get our election done. So we're supported, mostly for the change. I know there has been some concern that there's some loss of revenue for the Goodwill Fire Company because of the change, but that's the only thing I know of that really stands in its way. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else who would like to speak on the polling place assignment action items? Okay, then let's turn to general public comment. If anybody would like to make public comment today, now is the time. Please come forward. You have 3 minutes.
Good morning. Louis Troffer, 901 Powder Mill, Wynwood. This has to do with the return board. And at the previous meeting, there was a discussion as to what I did and did not see. What I did see was Mr. Allen at the primaries make certification of or recommend certification of the election without having the certification, or at least the review of the return board. And now things are changing. In fact, this is a change. We're now doing this public comments now, not at the end. So what I'm going to talk about may be something that's being addressed in this meeting, but I don't know. So it has to do with, I had asked Mr. Allen through an agenda request to confirm the home rule charter as to whether there could be changes made where he could have his staff actually filling in the functions of completing some of the data collection and confirmation, which as attorneys, Mr. Parks is, there's rules of evidence, and I don't think Mr. Allen is grasping the fact that having a bipartisan review of the audit of the ballots and what's coming in from the precincts is integral to ensuring that, what's the phrase, safe? Sorry, let me get this right. It's safe, sound, and secure elections. This is integral. You understand the rules of evidence. I'm not going to be pedantic about it, but there has to be corroborating testimony, and to have self-fulfilling testimony of his own staff and employees. While I'm not going to change the narrative and talk about the quality of the staff. That's not what I've ever been doing. It is having a fair and impartial review of the election process. And so Mr. Parks has been asked in these meetings to confirm whether the Home Rule Charter allows Mr. Allen to change the makeup. We have not heard anything on that. I just want to share this with you, and this is coming from the heart. Our nation's commitment to conducting free and fair elections is a miracle in this age. The rules of evidence are the philosophical underpinning of that freedom. Without these balances and checks and independent review, this miracle becomes a cheap magic show and sleight of hand. We can't have this. We have to have a review board. And if he's having problems, or if the Board of Elections is having problems with access to the review board, help them. This is important. This is very important. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak at public comment? The gentleman over there. Thank you.
As he comes up, Madam Chair, can I just
Yes, of course.
comment on that? And just as Mr. Troffer, the preliminary report of what you call the review board, was presented to the board prior to the certification. And in fact, I spoke to the gentleman who was the he's not the chairman, but he sort of presented it on behalf of the review board members. So I had the opportunity to look at it. I had the opportunity to speak with him. Any of the discrepancies that were there, I had the opportunity to speak about it with him. So, at least from my part, that was considered prior to the certification.
Prior to the certification.
Primary. In terms of, I haven't looked at it. I don't think you'll find anything in the Home Rule Charter regarding a quote review board, nor do I think you find anything in the election code regarding a review board.
Yes, there is. I'm sorry. There is.
There's a return.
No, there's a return board.
There's a return board.
But there's nothing about the composition, is what he's saying.
Yeah. And let me say, it has been the tradition for decades as far as, I've been involved in county elections since I was an assistant county solicitor in the mid-1990s. And the composition of what we used to call the tabulators, which have now evolved into somebody's called them now the review board, has always been, a bipartisan team of 1-to-1 ratio, whether it's been 9 people of each, or 6 people of each, or 12 people of each, party. And I think that is something that is, again, I'm not aware that in the election code there needs to be a certain party affiliation, or that at all is spelled out. There's tabulators, that are appointed by the election board to, what used to be read the back of the machines again, look at the write-in votes and tabulate those. And that's what the function of that is. I support, the continued function of the tabulators, review board, whatever you want to call them. Now, they're not an independent review panel separate from the election board, but I think they assist the election board in tabulating the results. And I think it's a good idea to have a bipartisan group. I thought that when my party was in the majority, and I think that now that my party is in the minority. So I hope we continue with that. But just to understand, we've sort of tried to elevate this review board to some sort of independent, Pennsylvania constitutionally mandated, review panel, that we are not able to take any action unless they, review it and tell us what to do. And that's just simply not the case. So I mean, that's my feeling. I just wanted to make that clear.
And
To those points, I would like to make clear
If I
that
can
I have
respond to him, please.
consistently,
Excuse me.
no,
He's
I'm
speaking
responding
me.
to your first.
I get to
Sir,
respond.
That was my.
I just
you
want
had
to,
your comment, I
Your
had
if I
my
could just
comment.
Your
assure that
Public
that's
comment
what
is
the-
Mr.
completed.
Crawford, but your
Yes.
public comment finished, and it sounds like you were at time,
He was talking to me.
but he was trying to provide helpful information, not just to you, but to
So
everybody
there's
in the
no
group.
response.
This
by-
is not a Q&A, no. Public comment is not a Q&A. I hope that his response has been helpful to you.
It has been,
I
and that's
think-
all I wanted to comment. I just wanted to say I totally encourage that, and I just hope that that is adopted and that's maintained by the Board of Elections. Now you can continue.
No, I'm sorry, you don't get to do that. Mr. Crawford, stop. Okay, Mr. Allen, if you have comment, I'd appreciate you making it now.
Very consistently, I've stated from the outset that we are going to maintain the bipartisan nature of the return board, and we're going to have more staff involved. I specifically used the word hybrid over and over again. I've got meetings with members of the return board, both Republican and Democratic, scheduled for this week, tomorrow, in fact. So the idea that the idea that there's going to be some kind of major change in the composition of the return board is it's never been recommended to this board by me, and it's not being pursued.
And that certainly was the assumption, I think, that Mr. McBlain and I were still operating under, that there is a continued function of the return board that we do believe is important. Thank you. Anybody else who would like to speak at public comment? Please, sir. Thank you. You've been waiting.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Chris Fabre, 7103 Sellers Avenue in Upper Darby. I want to talk about right-to-know requests. And it seems like there's a difference, like, get plenty of information from the precincts to where the judge of elections drops off their material at the Rose Tree Park. After that, there's virtually nothing. I brought this up at the last meeting where there's no chain of custody.
I'm going to give you a few more seconds because I'm about to speak. We do have the presentation
Okay,
that was
that's,
promised today when Mr. Allen presents, and hopefully that will help answer some of the questions you have.
Yeah, hopefully. But I want to go over right-to-know request. I mean, we've asked many times, many ways, and I'm told that, okay, all your questions have been answered. I don't feel that way. Okay. Let me just run through a few of them until my time elapses. We had asked about details regarding Dropbox collection, denied. Data from the past logic and accuracy testing, I feel that that's fair game, denied. Communications between county and HART Intercivic, including Esquil updates to the HART system. We're given the certification, but not what we requested, okay? Forms upon surrendering unwanted absentee ballots, denied. Chain of custody log, denied. And there's been quite a few requests for cast vote records, denied. And I have one here that is quite extensive, but it was asking for return sheets, tapes, and from Rose Tree Park to the wharf. Basically, information going from Rose Tree Park to the wharf. And I requested this one, and wait for it, this is what I received. I have, practically a page of requests. I received the election day guide, the poll workers manual, and a ballot box manual. That's all I got. And that was evidence of that all this was filled. And like I said before, the ballot box manual is great. I have a lot of questions about that, but I'll save that for another day. I won't go through all of them. But there again, another one for just basically procedures from RTP to the wharf. This one was chain of custody procedures and protocols during last primary for the Hart Verity voting machine V drives from the time Judge of Elections drop off V drives at Rose Tree Park. Already? Okay. And there again, I'm asking for a procedure, and I got the election day guide. I almost know that thing by heart by now, all 84 pages.
Thank you. No, sir, I just want to comment, and Mr. Solicitor, Mr. Parks, please tell me if I get this wrong, but a right to know law request in the county would be presented to the Office of Public Records, however they call it here, and that would be adjudicated by them, and that there are appeal rights in that. We are all subject, this team, the board, the staff, to those requests. And so when the Office of Public Records determines that a record properly meets the standard for production, we are polled or asked or need to deliver information related to those requests. So I have been asked myself to do searches of my records at times to provide information. So I can't weigh in on what they did or didn't provide to you, even though I appreciate that you're talking about information you requested related to our activities. That is ultimately the determination of that government legal team, and it's not the election board at all or any of the team here. We're just responsive when the requests are made. So there are appellate rights, I'm sure, within the adjudication of your requests that I would encourage you, if you think it's appropriate, to pursue if you think that you have been wrongfully denied. But this is unfortunately not the forum for that. Mr. Parks, anything else you would add to that? Okay.
10 or 20
Thank you.
seconds.
Again, I don't want to open this up to Q&A, so there'll be other opportunities. Okay, thank you, sir.
For your time.
Comment.
Yes.
I think some of the, again, I don't want to put my lawyer hat on over Mr. Parks, but I mean, the election code is specific that, basically all documents related to the election are open for public inspection. Some of the things that the, gentleman commented on, I would, if the county did deny it, it sounded like requests for documents that would typically be available. Maybe we can just follow up, and I'd ask him, I'll give him my contact information. If you send me copies, your right to know, maybe we'll coordinate with Mr. Parks that, again, I think broadly the election code opens more documents for public inspection than the right to know law. And I just want to make sure that the county departments are talking to one another, that, they didn't deny you because it might have been a document that is not available under the right to know, but it's pretty broad. I mean, when people ask me, I say, you can look at any document that exists within the four walls of the, election bureau is for the most part, an election-related document. You can't take, if Mr. Allen has his checkbook sitting in his desk, you can't take a look at that, but
contents of ballot boxes, contents of voting machines, there are other items that are specifically excluded.
But generally speaking, but things like processes and procedures. If Hart Verity, said this is how you should handle the B drives, this is our recommend. I believe all that would be open. But why don't we take a look, and I'd be happy to give you my contact information, or give it to Mr. Allen, and he'll get it to me, and happy to take a look just to make sure we're all on the right page with the Open Records Office.
Thank you. Any other person who would like to speak for public comment, please come forward.
Good morning. My name is Joyce Schwartz, 514 Lombardi Road in Drexel Hill. I want to start out by making some comments about my friends Louis and Karen. Louis and Karen are a wonderful asset to our county and to our community. They are civic-minded people that are kind and concerned and law-abiding and quiet citizens. During the pandemic, they opened their home and their kitchen.
I just want to make sure I understand. Public comment, is it open for everything? If it is, then we can go. All right, go ahead.
Yeah,
it's not usual to comment on citizens in the public comment.
Well, in this case, I need to
please.
Because they were denigrated last time. So I want to make sure that people understand what quality people these are. They opened their home and their kitchen. They organized an army of volunteers to provide thousands of meals for neighbors that could not get out. And they take time from their busy lives to come here and to be heard because they care about the integrity of our elections. They don't deserve to be publicly denigrated, Mr. Allen. There are ways of disagreeing with another person's conclusions without insulting them. And so that's all I would like to say about that. I do have some comments about about chain of custody. However, I do have a question. I know it's not Q&A, but would we be allowed to comment on chain of custody during the chain of custody item on the agenda? Or is this the only chance I have to comment on that?
No, but it's not the only chance. There will be continued public meetings, several of which will be before, at least one of which, if not two, will be before the election. So
Okay.
there will be other opportunities. But this is an
All right.
important presentation. We appreciate transparency. It was asked for at the last public meeting, so this is a meeting we're using to present
All right.
some information about that.
Okay, so I'd just like to use the rest of my time, if I may, just to back up to the return board issue, and just to remind Mr. McBlain and Ms. Lukenheimer that you folks both, in a previous meeting, supported the idea of the independent review board. And you were pretty strong with that. And I just ask that you would continue with that, and that the review board should not be quashed by the Bureau of Elections. And the Bureau of Elections should not take over the duties of the return board. We do have sections within the Pennsylvania Election Code that support the existence of the return board. I know it doesn't say how many people need to be on it and so on and so forth, but it does support their existence and their role in elections. I'd also like to comment on the hybridizing of the return board, which Mr. Allen referred to. I believe that's a term that he used previously. And anyway, I just would encourage just that the county be aware that the perception, as Mr. Allen has also said in the past, the perception of fairness in elections is very important. And so when we see the return board we don't want to see it used as kabuki theater, as putting forth a sort of impression that, we're being bipartisan here, when in reality we're not. And so that's all I have to say today. I do have a lot of comments about the Wharf Central County Center, and I'll save those for the next time. Thank you.
Anybody else who'd like to, sir?
Before we move on, I just want to make sure the record is clear and that folks watching this understand the return board under the election code. The election code does contemplate a return board. The return board is the Board of Elections, unless the Board of Elections delegates its authority. The practice of Delaware County, as John has mentioned, for many, many years has been to delegate that authority or to seek assistance from tabulators. And as the election code has changed, as the equipment has changed, the function of those people has changed. But if the Board of Elections, sitting as a 3-member group, wanted to be the return board, the election code specifically contemplates that, and smaller counties throughout the Commonwealth do exactly that. So understand that this is a delegation practice, really out of necessity, given the size of the county and the amount of duties the return board has. It's difficult for 3 individual human beings who constitute the board to perform all those functions. So that's really what we're talking about here. There's no independent concept in any part of the law or the Home Rule Charter or anything else for mandating an independent oversight of the Board of Elections. The Board of Elections is a bipartisan organization that is ultimately responsible for the activities in Delaware County, just to be clear.
No, that's fair. And I think also the hybrid nature, that's important. The staff has access to information, is experienced with processing it. And the goal of the hybrid was to have that information collected and presented, as Mr. Allen indicated he is doing, to members of the bipartisan return board. Yes, sir. Thank you.
So my name is Paul Dubaton, and I represent ownership of the building in Chester Heights that's up for the agenda. I don't know if this is de minimis or it's essential. I did hear a comment about a table that was in the entrance room. On Friday, I got a phone call. I'm here on behalf of Vince Barberi, who's been at all the meetings representing the building. He's away with his grandchildren, so he asked me to come on his behalf. He called me before he went on vacation and said, I made an offer to remove the big table in the conference room. I just want you to confirm that it can be done, but I did make that offer. Make sure it's done. On my way here this morning, I talked to my team, and they said, in fact, that it could be done the entire table, not just a portion of the table. Again, I don't know that that information is essential or not, but I thought since someone before me spoke about that being an impetus of its fluidity and openness, I thought I'd just bring it up right now.
Thank you. And I think we should move, if everybody's in agreement, the polling place assignments to the top of the agenda after public comment so that we could address some of those concerns, because I do think that that isn't going to be, I'm guessing, important information to the team.
And I'm also here, and again, I don't know how the format is here, but I'm here to answer any questions if they're asked of me.
So many people are here on this issue. We will move it to the top unless Mr. McBlain, anybody have any objections? Okay, so we'll move it to the top so that we can get to the bottom of this and what the recommendation is of the team who's visited the site. I think several of them have visited it. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Any other, yes, Ms. Trevor.
Thank you so much. Dr. Karen Fritz, 901 Powder Mill Lane, Wynwood, 81. I've had the opportunity to learn much about the elections in this last year in education I never thought I would get. I've been surprised about the differences between the protocols at the wharf and at the precincts, especially regarding chain of custody, which is what I'm addressing today in the agenda. At the precincts, there's actually pretty strict chain of custody. There's many watching eyes. There actually are published protocols. And if all of those are followed, they even tape the results on the door at the end of the day. If all of those are followed, there's a pretty good gross check and balance there. But none of that do I see at the wharf. There's no chain of custody that can be followed at the wharf for any ballot, batch of ballots, flash drives, or V drives. I have a list of 20 observers that have written attestation to that. There's no outside LNA testing of the machines. We have a difficult time even finding out when that testing is going to happen so we can observe it. There's no return board review of any of these returns. The Election Code Article 14, Section 1402 says that the returns are to be open to public inspection, but that is not happening at the wharf. The return board does not review probably what is half of what the ballots almost in our county. And most of the processes there can't be meaningfully observed. The word trust is not in the election code. The words verify, check, reconcile, document are. And so I'd like to ask this to be brought more to the wharf. Some practical steps. One of the points that I saw that was great at the wharf was the write-in ballot reconciliation. Happens right in the back of where the observers sit. The hardworking, dedicated employees put it up on the screens. You actually see what the voter wrote. You can see what the employee checks off. Wonderful. That's so great. There's never been one question here about that process. There's been lots of questions about the rest. So I have a few suggestions that do not require purchasing multi-million-dollar machines. May take a little more time, but would greatly improve transparency at the wharf. Have a visible chain of custody for all flash and V drives. 2, the ballot reconciliation process. Let us see those ballots. Let us watch. There's no voter identification on those ballots at that point. It does nothing. There's not any breach in security. Right spoiled on the ballot that needs to be adjudicated, so that definitely can't be scanned. Print out visible precinct data tapes every day. Put them on the door outside the wharf, like you do at the precincts. The ballot resolution area, have that employee slow down. Show us what they're doing. Don't let us have to fight over every single thing. The internet room, since you don't allow observers and watchers back there, have the employee tell the observers and the watchers that are there, I'm going to go upload 300 votes for Donald Duck, and we can watch on the screen to see what they're doing. These steps are simple. They would go far in increasing transparency. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name's Laura Lewis. I live on St. David's Avenue, Radnor Township. I wanted to speak briefly about, I'm always speaking here about the election machines and the problem with their vulnerabilities, particularly relating to external influences. And I wanted to cite the Fulton County, Pennsylvania election case that's currently in court Fulton County, Pennsylvania, a governmental body, and its election board and all the individual election officials are suing Dominion voting machines because of breaches in their contract. And I wanted to cite a couple of those, but basically after certification, they did a detailed forensic report that came out September 15th, a couple weeks ago, that showed that external USB hard drives had been inserted in the machines on several occasions, and that there was no known list of approved external drives that could have been or were used to or inserted into the machines. In this regard, the report concluded that there was no way to determine whether and to what extent these unauthorized drives compromised the data in the machines. In addition, the report concluded that there had been substantial changes to the drives, as seen with the inclusion of over 900 files and links created since the date of installation of the Dominion software, interconnected in a system to one another, and that this would be required to share data and counts between devices. However, because of this networking, unauthorized access to any one device allowed authorized access to any device connected to the network of devices. Among the findings, this constituted a direct violation of and failure of the conditions required to certify the Dominion certification report. The September report further determined that an external IP address that is associated with Canada and is found on the adjudication workstation, and this shows that at least one of the network devices had connected to an external device on an external network, and this was the same device that the post-certification Python script was found on. So basically what you have is you have a foreign country able to insert and affect changes on the machines and no way to actually verify what changes were made or how they were made. So I feel that we need to work on getting rid of the machines. And I know that we don't use Dominion, but the same COTS, the same components are purchased by all three of the major machine companies that are used for voting in this country. Thank you very much.
Perfect timing. Would anybody else like to speak at public comment? Yes, sir.
Good morning. Jody Allen, 110 Kelly Drive, Chadsford. First, I'd like to thank Mr. Allen and the rest of his staff. I think since the enactment of Act 77, with each successive election, I should mention, I'm a Joe as well in Fallcroft. With each successive election, I feel that the directions for the poll workers, the poll worker training has gotten better in every election. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. The one concern I have is just with this upcoming election, given the current political climate, I think there's a lot more interest in this election. I think we will see a significantly larger number of poll watchers than we have in the past. And my concern, I would urge you, as you complete the poll worker training books as we head into the training season soon, to perhaps place a greater emphasis on poll security in terms of more clearly defining through the training what the responsibilities of both the judge elections as well as the rest of the poll workers are in regards to the poll watchers, when they can step in and say that someone is making excessive challenges such that it's becoming disruptive to the running of the polling place. Also in terms of security in the polling locations, more clearly defining what the role of the constable is in those municipalities that have elected constables. I had a situation during the primaries where a constable showed up at 7:30 to sign the pay sheet who I had not seen all day long. When I confronted him with this, he said, I've been outside a few times, but I didn't want to come in, didn't want to make myself, didn't want to impose or frighten anyone. And I said, I've been in this precinct for 4 elections. This is literally the first time I've seen you, ever. So I would like some clarification for the Joes, both in terms of what the expectation is in terms of paying constables if they're not showing up, but also if there's a possible way to disseminate the contact information for constables, so that if there is an issue, that the Joes know that they have a constable, they can reach them. If not, obviously they will need to call 911 if there are issues. And I'm aware that police are not allowed in the polling place in uniform under normal circumstances. That's a constable's responsibility. But in a case where a constable does not provide their contact information or is not available, I just want to make sure that we're taking care of our poll workers and our people, because perhaps the greatest issue for security is if we don't have enough people working the polls, it's going to take a lot longer to process the votes. That could potentially disenfranchise people. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your service. Mr. Parks, the role of the police if there's a criminal activity, could you please just explain that to the group?
Yes, so the general rule in the election code is that uniformed or ununiformed police are not permitted within 100 feet of the polling place on election day. There are exceptions if, for example, the polling place is in a police station or next door to one, that kind of thing. However, police are able to respond to matters involving public safety. So if, for example, there was a conflict at a polling place a number of years ago, there was a fight between two rival unions at a polling place in Springfield, who were supporting different candidates, that type of situation, the police obviously can come out and provide that service. The speaker was absolutely correct. The primary vehicle for election day matters would be the team of constables acting in concert with the judges of election and poll workers on election day, and that's mandated by the election code. The constable is sort of like an election day police officer of sorts, and they're typically outfitted in uniforms that look like police uniforms. However, there are not constables for every precinct, and not every constable is going to be, able to respond immediately in the event of something that potentially threatens public safety. And so in that instance, the judges of election and other poll workers are, they may have no choice but to ask for the assistance of the local police. And obviously in our trainings, we instruct that the poll workers, in particular the judges of election, try to resolve things peaceably, try to avoid the escalation of disputes, and try to turn to the constables first. But ultimately that becomes a matter of the judgment of the judge of elections, and hopefully in consultation with the other poll workers at that site as to whether the matter has reached the point where, asking for the intervention of the police, particularly if a constable is not able to respond or otherwise unavailable, or is there and hasn't resolved the issue. So that's the broad parameters. Obviously, every situation is different. Everybody's judgment is different. The poll worker or judge of elections, if they're a 90-year-old person who has poor health and considers himself frail, that might be a different situation than a 45-year-old hale and hearty person and how they handle conflict. So there are a lot of variables in this, but that's the big picture structure.
Thank you. And Mr. Allen, I do think it's important feedback. I do think that some of, at least hopefully all of it, is covered in the poll worker training and will be emphasized as we get closer. I do think you're right. I think there's more energy right now, perhaps. I don't know if it's more, but there's going to be energy about this election. We're an important county and an important state, a commonwealth.
We are looking to institute, perhaps for the first time anywhere in the Commonwealth, specific training for constables. So we've got to do some outreach with the leaders of both law enforcement as well as the leadership within the constable community to determine the level of interest. However, I would note that in reviewing this very issue previously with Mr. Parks, there is not a lot of direct guidance in the election code. It's pretty vague in terms of the authorities and the powers of the constable. However, we do want to equip them with as much information as possible and possibly pay them extra for going through training so that they're more familiar with what should and should not be happening inside the polling place, specifically with regard to the biggest complaint we hear from here and there regarding politicking or violating the campaign-free zone that is the polling place.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Ms. Guiney.
Colleen Guiney, 337 Dickinson Avenue in Swarthmore. I just want to also say thank you to the voter registration folks, to the staff in the office who work many, many hard hours, and to all of you on the election board and staff. Your patience is astounding and wonderful and important and an integral part of what makes this nation a democracy, a republic, a freestanding country that has input from our voters. And I appreciate all of the voters who come in to the polling places and the folks who are manning those hundreds of polling places here in Delaware County for that 13-hour day plus drop-off and pickup. I urge every voter when you come into the polling place to thank your poll workers because they're here in service to the community. And I also want to urge anyone listening to this tape today to understand that we continue to need more poll workers as our older generations have retired. There is a consistent need for new folks to come in and help out. So if you have not yet seen the Delco Votes website, I urge you to look at that site and join this team of folks who are doing the best they possibly can to have a free, fair, and open election in Delaware County. And you know, as the chair of the Democratic Party, I want to support your efforts and certainly urge all Democratic voters and all voters to consider being part of the process of public service and joining in this community. So again, thank you. Your work is hard. Your patience appears to be infinite. So I just want you to know that you are appreciated by so many folks who are not here today. And I'm just speaking on behalf of so many voters who are very grateful for your work. So again, thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak during the public comment period? Yeah, Mr. McLean, do you have any comments you want to make before I close the period? No. Does anybody else have any comments before we move? We're going to jump ahead to the polling place assignment action items. Okay.
The reason I'm presenting from here is we wanted to show a couple of photos.
Oh, I thought we were going to move the polling place action items just ahead because of the.
Yes.
Oh, you are? Okay. Oh, these are photos of that. I thought this was your security, your chain of custody.
No,
oh, right. You have more photos.
no.
Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Allen. Please proceed.
It's quite all right. So this first photo is it may be hard to see, but if anyone wants to come closer, I think this is let me back up a little bit.
Yeah, we're talking about Chester.
Normally, I don't get involved in polling place assignments. However, this one, as the differing sides, the opposing sides have pointed out, is what you would call a close call. And so I had a chance to meet with Marvin Rideout of the warehouse. He evaluates polling place accessibility, as well as just suitability generally, and Vince Barbieri, the property manager, or the realtor for the property, I should say. So these photos are I just want to provide some guidelines or some guidance rather, as far as why I'm making the following recommendations. The first room, as was noted earlier by the speaker, needs to have that like boardroom style table and chairs removed, because this room would be basically only an entry point. There's also room in the hallway outside for voters to queue up. There's also sheltered space, a rather significant amount of sheltered space for voters to queue up on the sidewalks outside of the building. But this room itself, I think there have been a couple of different presentations or ideas on how this polling place could be configured, and one idea was that it could be placed in this room. This room itself is not large enough to serve as a complete polling place with check-in stations, voting stations, the touch writer, and the scanner. However, this room is the lunchroom. And you'll notice there are two yellow arrows on that photo. There's a counter along the back of the room as you're looking toward the windows at the far end of the room. And there's also a counter on the right side of that photo, both of which are not permanent countertops that can be removed. And I spoke with Mr. Barbieri, and once you remove that back one, we can put either a couple of standalone voting booths, possibly the quad there. I don't know that the quad would fit, but at least two standalone booths. We could also have the touch.
I'm sorry, the quad being
The quad being a four-station, it's kind of like, it has an H divider that provides privacy. It's kind of like a cloverleaf formation, four-leaf cloverleaf, so that voters can be around that. However, this middle section, that provides room for, as was noted, it's not a great space for a bunch of standalone four-legged booths. However, that middle section, that large table in the middle of the lunchroom, once those chairs are removed, you can easily fit 6, possibly 7 of the fold-up privacy booths, the temporary, they're like corrugated material. So you would have another 6 voting stations there. Then you could have, beyond that table, I don't know if you can see it, there are 2 little green arrows toward the other windows. You could even have another couple of voting stations there. So Mr. Barbieri indicated this is one of the 2 countertops that's on the right side from the previous 2 photos ago that could be removed. And that gold arrow indicates where you could have the ballot scanner, so that there's kind of a natural flow through the polling place. That would be the last stop where voters are feeding it into the scanner. And then the green arrow on the floor shows the traffic flow out the back way. So there's 2 doorways to that room. So the rest of the space, that narrow arm of the L-shaped lunchroom, would not be used for voting. So based on this, there's more than adequate parking room for the voters to line up inside, and plenty of room for voters to line up, and if needed, in a sheltered area outside. And although it's not the optimum size, this site provides a workable flow, and more importantly, returning the polling place to Chester Heights, which I think is an overriding concern. I don't think we can jump on the assumption that everybody in Chester Heights has a car. And even if everybody even if it could be proven to me that everybody in Chester Heights has a car, there's no guarantee that someone won't go out to their garage and their battery dies that morning, or they've got a flat tire. So I recommend that the board authorize this change to the new location on the condition that board staff first verifies that the boardroom-style table and chairs are removed from the entry room, that the building removes completely the 2 sets of countertops that'll allow us enough space for that polling place, and lastly, remove the chairs on that lunchroom island and elsewhere in the lunchroom so that we have adequate space for voting in the polling place.
And I do believe, sir, that you mentioned that at least as to the removal of the 2 tables, that was confirmed that they could be done and would be done. How, Mr. Allen, do you procedurally, if we were to vote on whether to accept the recommendation of you and your team, do we carry out the verification that you've indicated?
My recommendation is that you approve the change pending verification by staff of that. And then once that verification occurs, then the mailing would occur. I would also like to address one of the valid concerns that was raised earlier, was changing polling places before an election. It's not an ideal situation, but we do have to change polling places from time to time. And I understand the tug between the 2 ideas, having the bigger space at Garnet Valley, but also having a location here in Chester Heights. There's no perfect time to change a polling place, but I believe that there's more than adequate time to send out notifications to the voters, and we will certainly do so. We'll post also, in the event someone were to go to Garnet Valley Middle School, we'll have signage there to indicate that it has been moved back into Chester Heights.
And Mr. Allen, another concern that you've implicitly addressed, but I would appreciate it if you could make it explicit, is the Joe's ability to observe the entire voting process.
That was a concern I had before going out to the site. I believe that you would be able to set up a check-in station and all of the voting stations and the scanner and the touch writer, so that within that room you would be able to view all the voters' activities. My other concern was that, chief concern was that this is a large precinct. It's the 5th largest in Delaware County with more than 2,300 voters, as was noted earlier. And I firmly believe that if we have 8 or more voting stations, and I'm envisioning 9, 10, possibly 11 or 12, we should be able to keep a flow. It might get a little warm in there through the day.
Well, it looks like it could get crowded. Is that just the way the picture is, the length of it, or will it?
No, it's like I said, it's not the ideal location. But again, I think the overriding concern is a site that is within Chester Heights, and we do have to take that in. That's what I believe the board should take into consideration.
Mr. McLean, do you have any questions?
No, I don't have any questions.
Mr. Parks, are you comfortable with the nature of the vote being conditional?
I am comfortable with the conditional, and I would recommend, in addition to the verification, that some written, bipartisan agreement of sorts reflecting the terms, including removal of the tables and removal of the chairs and removal of the counters, be documented, just so that gives everybody a chance to make sure everybody's on the same page. And if there's any change of on either side, there's at least a document to reference as opposed to oral arrangement. So I would recommend that there be some kind of written understanding or memorializing this arrangement.
Madam Chair, then I would make a motion to approve the polling change as presented by the staff with the conditions as enunciated by Mr. Allen, and ask that those that he and his staff reduce those conditions to writing and send those to the landlord and also the election board staff at Chester Heights. Ultimately, the judge of elections, the person is going to have to enforce, those conditions. So that would be my motion.
I'll second that. I just want to say, it does make all of us, I think, a little bit nervous. I hope it makes everybody on both sides nervous about this, because we're trying to achieve the important goal of moving the polling place back into Chester Heights. I did visit, as I noted at the last meeting, the old polling location, and that was not ideal either. There was a long corridor that voters had to go down. It was crowded, it was uncomfortable, but I think, as Ms. Driscoll noted, you did open up into a gymnasium. So there wasn't a perfect location either, and I don't think we have a lot of leverage with the kindness of private parties who open their locations to our polling places. We appreciate that, but just want to emphasize that, this is the fundamental constitutional right that we're trying to allow everybody, however they vote, to exercise. So the importance of these conditions and the requests, they're not conditions designed to be onerous to a private party. They're conditions designed to make sure that voters can exercise their right to vote without interference unnecessarily from anything from location to individuals, et cetera. So it's just so important. But with that, I am inclined to take the risk on the recommendation of Mr. Allen, that I do think that the ability to find a not ideal spot, the other one wasn't ideal, but in Chester Heights is to me that what I agree with him pushes me over the edge to be inclined to vote in favor, and I'm going to take a vote in a second. Do you have anything else you'd like to comment?
I have no further comment.
Okay, then all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion passes.
Next up, we have a proposed move with bipartisan support from the Aston Community Center to Newman University. This petition was filed on September 15. The recommendation is to move ahead with that request.
And are there two bipartisan supports? Should we do them collectively?
We can. The other was Darby Township 3-1, moving it from the Goodwill Fire Company on Cook Avenue to Evangelical Assembly of God Church at 725 West Ashland.
Okay, and the other two located on the agenda are themselves still under review, so they're not going to be presented today.
Yes.
So do we have a motion to accept the bipartisan recommendations as to Aston 1 and Darby Township 3-1?
I would move to approve the polling place reassignment of Aston 1 and Darby Township 3-1 as listed in agenda item 9, B, and C on our agenda.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion passes. And that's it for the polling place assignments, correct?
Yes.
All right, then I'd like to return to your report where we left off. The Director of Elections, please.
Very quickly, the UOCAVA military overseas ballots, the first ballots to go out to the voters as required by federal law 45 days before Election Day, which was this past Saturday. That mailing was completed successfully and was reported to the state as same. The only 3 items out of more than 300 that needed to be held back were items where we needed clarification on information from those 3 voters. Next up, the status of the ballot database and testing. I'm pleased to report that the ballot database, the Department of State certified the candidate list finally this past week. So that allowed us to in turn lock down the ballot database with one local contest, as we mentioned here earlier, which was it's the commissioner vacancy in the first ward in Haverford Township. Thank you. And that has been locked down. We were in contact. We have been in contact last few weeks with the ballot printer for Election Day ballots, Phoenix Graphics. We did receive the test decks last Thursday or Friday. We were able to complete the testing of those. So there were 2 from each precinct, and then there are varied counts. And test decks are ballots that are purposely marked so that you can test the scanner and the voting equipment software to make sure that the result comes out as you anticipated, as the ballots are marked, and it passed 100%. Similarly, we received a test deck from our vote-by-mail vendor, Fort Orange Press, yesterday. That also passed at 100%. So production of the ballots we anticipate for Election Day ballots will begin tomorrow. We expect logic and accuracy testing to begin the Tuesday after the holiday coming up. I want to say that's the 11th, going by memory now. We'll also have vote-by-mail ballots going into production in the next few days. We'll at least provide the files to the vendor. The goal is to have the first mailing of the vote-by-mail ballots dropping on or about shortly after October 5th. So that provides the status of the mail-in absentee ballots. Also, we have currently 44,000, just under 44,000 applications for mail-in and absentee ballots processed. We have a backlog of approximately 12 to 1,500. That was 3,000, and that was due to issues that we were having with the Department of State's SURE system, where voters had provided 2 forms of identification, a second to help verify in the primary election, and for whatever reason, when they carried over the information from the primary to the general election, they did not carry over that second form of ID, which required us to go back to the paperwork, find it, and re-verify on a one-by-one basis more than 1,000 applications. So
thus far, we have about 44,000 vote by mail or absentee applications that have been processed?
Yes.
And how many you say are in the process?
We have a little more than 1,200 that are backlogged right now, so we're already at 45,000 plus, assuming those 1,200 all verify with ID.
What are you going to ask about the number? The permanent mail-in application, is that additional number?
That's all inclusive right there. So that includes military, overseas, mail-in, and absentee. We're at just under 44,000 as of first thing this morning.
Have we begun producing the weekly or biweekly reports, giving us the breakdown in terms of how many applications, how many have been mailed out, how many, I know they haven't been returned yet.
Well, none have been mailed out. Right.
Right. But have we started that report? I want to make sure I'm on that list.
We'll add you to the list gladly. We have been issuing those to the Republican and Democratic parties. I see representatives of both here for the last few Saturdays, I want to say. At least the last 2, if not 3 Saturdays, we've been issuing updated reports So we'll gladly.
I don't,
I don't know how you didn't get on the list, but.
And just to be clear, our practice is, as the election day nears, we will go into a twice-a-week reporting format that we've done in the past. But I think our practice has been, when we're this far out, once weekly is acceptable to the parties, at least as best I'm aware. And then as we get closer, say in the last 30 days or so, we go to a twice-weekly format.
and yeah, that's great. I mean, I've seen this. I just want to get on the list.
Duly noted. So with that, we do have a quick PowerPoint presentation that the board had asked me to give regarding chain of custody and just general election security concerns. And I think that's being pulled up. So very quickly, there are many areas of election security, ranging from just physical security of the rooms and voter records and ballot security systems, security cameras, making sure the hinges are on the right side of the door so that the pins can't be popped out, seals, security seals on election equipment, on the election supply carrier that we call affectionately the cage. As well as software precautions. I want to note that the software for Delaware County's voting system is stored and operated on a standalone set of computers. It's not networked in any way. There's no commingling of software. So if we're using Word or Excel or PowerPoint or any third-party, communication, email systems, what have you, none of that resides on the same system, on the standalone, non-networked, not connected to the internet computers. And I also appreciate, there was one commenter earlier about Fulton County. We do not use Dominion voting equipment, and there have been no issues with any of our equipment being in any way, shape, or form hooked up to the internet or connected in any way. Another area of security is simply making sure that there's fair and equal ballot access, making sure that you're educating your poll workers on how to properly process voters. It doesn't sound like an area of security, but really it is. If you don't have access, if people are wrongly stopped at the polling place from receiving a ballot for any reason, that is an issue of security as well. Our balloting system, as I noted just now, is the Hart Verity system. There are a variety of reasons that it was selected by Delaware County, but the most prominent one was that it has the individual ballot has a randomized barcode so that it cannot be scanned more than once. There are a variety of other features listed here, and as it relates to Hart's rivals, our main rivals, including ES&S and Dominion, and those are some of the reasons that Delaware County and Lancaster County selected the Hart system. Then there are different processes involved in the balloting security. Logic and accuracy testing at the warehouse, as mentioned, is going to begin a week from next Tuesday. It is and always has been open to the public. It's never been attended, but it is and always has been open to the public. We have the cages that are delivered to the polling places secured with tamper-evident seals that are uniquely numbered so that that when the judges arrive there in the morning, they're able to verify that the seal that was placed on at the warehouse is still in place, and they're able to log that on their paperwork. They run 0 tapes in the morning to make sure that the equipment was not run prior to election day. So there's a startup process. The poll books provide a layer of security because those have all the listed registered voters. Inside of those records include indications whether that person has applied for or returned a vote by mail ballot, and thus would have to remit that ballot in order to receive a ballot, or if they haven't, they arrive without that in their possession, they would have to vote a provisional ballot. If they need ID, the poll book indicates as much for their first time voting, as well as whether they're an inactive voter and they need to sign an affirmation. So the poll books, registered voters also include their signatures so that the poll workers in the precinct are able to do a spot check verification that that is the voter, in the book. There are other safety measures like public counters so that if a poll watcher were, for example, to be needing to monitor more than one polling place, either in the same location or at two different locations, they could stop back and compare the numbered list of voters and see that there are 100 voters that have cast ballots. They could go over to the counter and see that there are 100 ballots cast. The results tapes, when the polls close, this is probably the single most important item, and I'm going to make reference to it later, because regardless of what happens with the V drives, the fact that when they print out that results tape and post it to the window, attach it to the return sheet that comes back to the Board of Elections, attach it to the return sheet that goes with it, that is maintained by the minority inspector, that would be your single biggest check, your safeguard. That is our biggest safeguard if anyone were to be concerned about the provenance of the V drive, for example. We've never once had any incident where the V drive that was brought down to the wharf gave results that differed in any way, shape, or form from the tapes that were printed out before that V drive was removed when the polls were closed. Next, there are vote by mail security measures. Go ahead.
It showed because I've been there, so at the end of the night, when we describe the tapes, these are printed tapes that come out of the voting machine with the tallies.
Yes.
For all of the candidates. And I believe there are at least 5 copies that are printed out. One goes, in the window, as you indicated, is posted publicly in each precinct. It's supposed to be. One is returned with the judge of election materials. One goes with the minority inspector, so that they have a record of it. And then there's 2 tapes available from representatives of major political parties that they can take from the polling place that evening, correct?
Yes, the equipment has the option to print even more. So let's say there's a poll watcher for candidate Jones, another one for candidate Smith, another one for candidate Stevenson. They could print out 6, 7, 8 copies, as many as they need on election night. So that's before that V drive is removed, that's before that V drive is transported, and that's our best safety check, along with the paper ballots themselves. Which
so representatives of the party would have the ability to have the paper printout, and then when we post the results on our website, we break it down to voting day or in person, and tapes would match the in-person voting statistics.
Yes, yes.
Those additional printouts, I think there was someone said earlier that there were going to be a lot of observers. That's very possible for different candidates. Is that part of the training materials, how to print out extra results?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
People sometimes get frustrated that the election day guide for poll workers is 100 pages long. That's why it's 100 pages long. You have to have stuff like that in it.
Well, we're still barely over 80. If I had my druthers, I'd get it down to 60, but Mr. Parks is correct. Some of the tests that Delaware County performs, we verify the ballot contents, meaning when the boxes of printed ballots arrive, we make sure that we go through each box and they're shrink wrapped in packs of 50, but we're making sure that Alden East has, the appropriate number of 50 ballots, packs in the Alden East box, and that if we need 2 boxes, it's going to have, we're going to check both boxes to make sure that if there are, for example, 1,200 ballots expected or needed there, that's what's going to be supplied. We test mark the ballots on the scanner at the printer. So the printer that we currently use, Phoenix Graphics, they have served hundreds of jurisdictions over the years, and they remarked that we were the first jurisdiction to actually bring a ballot scanner up to the printing facility, where we mark 2 extra ballots that we request to be printed from each and every precinct to make sure that we don't have any surprises on Election Day. So all of those are kept and maintained. They're marked as the test ballots, and then the results tape is run at the end. We set up a universal scanner so that we can test all 428 precincts ballots. So we're one of the only jurisdictions in the Commonwealth to do that, and we're proud of it. And the printer actually responded that they wished more of their clients did this. We test scan the ability of the mail-in ballots and envelopes, as well as I mentioned earlier in this meeting. We test the database, as mentioned earlier in this meeting. Then we verify, as mentioned, the printed ballots. And we test our poll workers. So we have, for them to earn their pay in past elections, we've required them to pass an examination. So we work to update and clean the voter rolls. The cleanliness of the voter rolls is part of the security of the election. So we use the Postal Service's NCOA, or National Change of Address programs, to detect whether people have moved within Delaware County or outside of Delaware County to another county in the state or out of state entirely. We utilize death records to cancel. Those are the only ones you don't have to really send a notice on. You send a confirmation, but you're really just canceling the record outright. So we also monitor all of our returned mail. We update through all the items that we receive through the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. And then there are registration file comparisons that are performed with multi-state comparison systems that are governed by the member states and controlled by the member states through the Electronic Registration and Information Center. And that is easily one of the best programs that have come along in the last 15 years. Considerations for the future would involve, I've been an advocate for complete canvass mailing to all registered voters every 2 years. And that would involve a first mailing to the address of the registration and a second round based on return mail that would be a forwardable piece. So the first piece is return service requested, the second one bounces back and we're able to log it. We'd also like to recommend to the state that we be able to accept national change of address records at face value. It is part of the Help America Vote Act that jurisdictions can and should accept NCOA records that indicate that someone has moved from point A to point B. We send a notice to point B if they've moved within Delaware County, for example. Right now, the state has requirements that require us to get something signed back from the voter. It seems counterintuitive compared to what other states are doing to clean up the voter rolls and prevent problems on Election Day. The Election Day supplies I've described earlier, so I won't go back into that. Absentee and by-mail ballots, there's a lot of concern about the security of that. There's a signed application that's required from a registered voter. So we can't just take an application from someone who's not registered and process it. It's impossible to do. It won't. The SURE system won't allow us to process a request for a mail ballot for a non-voter. Next, we have to have verification of identification. So that means they have to provide, the voter has to provide a PennDOT number, like either the driver's license or the ID card, or the last 4 digits of the Social Security number, and those have to match up with the date of birth and the name of the individual. When they're not verified, we can still mail a ballot, but if that envelope comes back If they provide proof in the meantime, we're able to count it if they finally verify. But if they don't, that return envelope is set aside and not counted.
Yeah, before you move on, I just want to stress this. There are a lot of people out there who are advocating for voter ID, universal voter ID. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court decided in a case a few years ago that because of the way the Commonwealth was proposing to try to manage that, and because tens of thousands of people by the Commonwealth's own estimation would not be able to get those ID cards, you're essentially disenfranchising those people, and they found it unconstitutional under the Pennsylvania Constitution. But there is voter ID for all mail-in ballots. There actually is universal voter ID for mail-in ballots, and I don't think people really realize that.
And for those who first appear at the new polling place.
Yes, first-time voters in the polling place also have an ID requirement.
Considerations in the near future, speaking of voter ID, we anticipate next spring or next fall that there will be a statewide referendum on the question of requiring voter ID. We have to go into that understanding the pros and the cons. I'm of the personal and professional belief that voter ID is one of those things that both sides kind of have wrong. I think there's the anti-voter ID group believes that it's going to disenfranchise countless individuals, and I don't believe that's the case. And the pro-voter ID folks think that it's going to wrap the entire system in this new, warm, perfect security blanket, and I know that's not the case either. There have been and will continue to be instances where people are using an outdated ID to vote in the wrong jurisdiction, for example. So then the next question is the accessibility of it, of the ID. How accessible will it be for every voter? The world's largest democracy is India, with 800 million voters, and ahead of each election, they require voter ID, but they also task themselves with going neighborhood by neighborhood. This is incredible to me, but and issuing new photo IDs to every single eligible person ahead of every federal election. I don't know that we could afford to do or incorporate such a solution here, but would it be possible, for example, for a local jurisdiction to get into issuing IDs? And what would be the thresholds for that? That's one of the questions. And then lastly, what will the law accept as IDs? One of the reasons for not having ID is that if any one or two of us here were to go exercise our First Amendment right to religion today, or assembly, or to petition the government, or to have a protest, whatever, there's no one who ever greets you and says, first, before you do that, we need to check your ID. And voting is technically, not technically, legally, an extension of our First Amendment right to speak freely. So that's where the opponents come in. Where the defenders come in is that, and I straddle it as much as I can. The defense of it is it helps ensure when most people have it, and you have a safety net for those who don't, who left their wallet or purse on the SEPTA last night. It helps assure that you check in the right Mary Jones or the right Steve Smith, especially in a mother-daughter situation in the same household, or a father-son, or in a larger apartment building where you can have two Joe Jones. The worst thing that you can happen right now is the clerk, through no mistake or no attempt at fraud, checks in the wrong Joe Jones. Then that Joe Jones comes to vote and is told they've already voted and they can't vote. So one of the things that ID does allow, especially in jurisdictions that employ electronic poll books, is the rapid scanning of the right date of birth, and it checks in the right voter, and you have fewer inaccuracies. So there we are. I just mentioned electronic poll books. They have the ability to scan IDs. They have the ability to speed up voter check-in. They have the ability to redirect voters very easily. Sir, ma'am, you're in the wrong polling place. This is where you need to go. And longer term, some jurisdictions employ universal vote centers. I don't know that we're ready for that here. A universal vote center means you would have a smaller number of locations, but anyone in Delaware County would be able to use that. That would require an interconnected system of poll books, not polling equipment, poll books. I want to emphasize that. And there are inherent risks and rewards in that. Because if the system shuts down, then how secure are you if the network between the systems, if it's hacked, for example, then how safe are those records? So those are some of the considerations. Another example of election security is simply making sure that your voters understand what's going on. This is from 2021. We made an extensive effort to make sure that voters were not disenfranchised when we had 2 separate paper ballots. It started at the printer. We're probably the only jurisdiction that I'm aware of that made sure that when our ballots arrived for every precinct, they arrived A, B, A, B, A, B. It made it really hard for the judge of election to instead just hand out A, and then be reminded later, hey, you haven't been handing out ballot B. We also created signage. We tried to inform voters well in advance to make sure that everything works. They received what they were supposed to. We mentioned our vote tabulation systems include paper ballots, which allow for a voter verifiable paper audit trail, marked by pen, not pencil. They have barcodes to prevent any single ballot from being scanned a second time in the precinct. They provide the voters with a voter something that they can check before they're casting it, and a record of the results. We have a record of those results being verified through 4 recounts so far, just in the last, in less than the last year. So we have the ability to detect in that mark if it's even slightly less than 5% of the target. They make a check mark inside the box. It'll detect it. It detects overvotes and warns the voter that you've overvoted a contest, and it gives the voter the option to either go back and spoil the ballot, or they can just cast it as is. I once ran into a voter who said, well, I purposely overvoted that one contest because I wanted to be able to tell both candidates I voted for them. There are other alerts. If the entire ballot is undervoted, for example, the voter doesn't understand and simply underlined or circled all the candidates' names instead of filling in the box next to it, it would kick that ballot back to give the voter the chance to correct, to recast or mark their ballot properly. And then even if one of those were to slip through during the resolution process, we have an undervoted ballot. If we can see what the voter's intent is, we're able to make a determination. And that system records who made every single decision. There's also a set of rules called what constitutes a vote that's backed up. Yes, sir.
On the issue of undervotes, let me make sure I'm clear. At the precincts, if we see this a lot, say presidential elections. Somebody comes in and votes for president, but doesn't necessarily go down and vote for a state representative or a party office or something like that. If I feed my ballot in, it doesn't get rejected because there's an undervote.
No, it does not. Okay. And that was a determination made by this board. There are differing systems, philosophies,
I don't
rules.
disagree with that. I just want to make sure my understanding was correct.
We found, and one time I was not aware of the board's decision.
People want to undervote. Right. Yes.
So there was one time last fall where I was not aware of the board's decision on that matter. We had it programmed so that last fall, if it was a vote for 3 office, for example, and the voter selected only 2, we had it programmed to, it didn't force the voter to make a third selection, but it gave the voter the option to. And I heard back from the board, don't do that. And secondly, I heard back from voters, why are you trying to make me vote for a third candidate? I only like 2 of them. So we don't do that anymore. If there's a mark on the ballot, a valid selection on the ballot, it will be processed as is. But any undervoted contest later through the review process on vote by mail ballots will be examined because the voter doesn't have the opportunity to be there. In a recount, it also would apply to any ballots cast in person.
So the undervotes for the mail-in get kicked out for the reconciliation process?
Yes.
And just so, I don't disagree with how our settings are, I just wanted to make sure that was correct. I know Montgomery County tried when they originally used their machine, said that it was rejected for any undervote. It was a disaster.
Well, that's right, but this is a constant learning. So if you did say, let's reevaluate it, and it's something we could consider. We have a newly constituted board, but.
And I think Jim maybe can speak to this. He talked about a total undervote, and I think that's where you put a ballot in and the scanner doesn't read a vote for any candidate. That, I think, is a different scenario. It will flag that because that's unlikely that somebody would go to a polling place and then submit a ballot that didn't have a vote for any candidate.
I think there's a box at the bottom, isn't there?
Yeah, there may be. I do not intend to vote for any candidate. Yeah, but it's pretty rare.
The poll worker's face and say,
and typically it's what Jim described. Somebody goes through and they are underlining or circling names as opposed to filling in the box. And so that, that does get flagged as I understand it.
So the system has 2 ways to verify and back up the results immediately. As mentioned before, you have the tapes that are printed, and then ultimately you have the paper ballots themselves. This is similar to what we've already discussed. I do want to address something that came up at the last meeting, and that was the suggestion that there were V drives that were delivered out of a bag. They were just dumped out. And I believe you have access to the video of the time in question. So before you start that, I want to emphasize that we do have a system that we instituted ahead of the May 2021 primary. And that was when we initially had, in some precincts, 2 scanners, in other precincts, 1 scanner. And so we color-coded the V drives themselves, but then we had a Tyvek envelope, a tamper-evident Tyvek envelope. And so the V drives are transported by the judge of election. They're first placed in the Tyvek envelope, and the poll workers sign across the flap so that you can see whether or not this is the original Tyvek envelope from the polling place. Then we only cut these open when they get to the wharf. So I understand there's a valid point raised by Chris earlier about wanting to add to the chain of custody and document who, for example, is in the truck, for example. In this case, it was delivered by one of our staff members, Patty Carfagno. So she was the one making trips back and forth from Rose Tree Park, and she was the only one making deliveries that night. But this video shows these were in fact delivered in, it's hard to see, but these were in fact delivered in these white Tyvek envelopes that we have, all 428 of them here. So I don't know if you can hit play on that, or. So you can see Patty coming in there with the red bag. that was referenced before. I apologize, he's kind of... Now, right there, this is the two persons who were receiving and opening private envelopes are seated right here. One of the individuals who asked about whether these arrived not in private envelopes is visible here. As I mentioned, literally 3.5, 4 feet away from that table. You can start seeing the ring pulling out the white side envelope from the bag. Then she lifts up the bag to show that there's nothing else outside of the Tyvek envelope. So I didn't characterize anyone's motives last week, but I did say rather emphatically that what was being alleged did not happen. And I have here the Tyvek envelopes and the video of that very citation. And quite honestly, I was a little stunned that the first time this allegation would come up wasn't in May or June or July or August, but for the very first time in September after that election. So I apologize.
Chain of custody? Are we discussing chain of custody?
Yes, we're documenting it as well.
You want to talk about this right now?
No.
Mr. Tarfer, please.
Look what he's doing.
This is not a Q&A, sir.
But this is what he's doing.
No.
He's
You're disrupting this meeting, and if you continue, I'll have you move.
Understood.
Thank you.
Secondly, part of the chain of custody involves the documents that we referenced earlier. At the last meeting, there was a commenter who brought forward a photograph of, I'm not sure what it is, but these are copies of return sheets, not the originals. And the implication was that we had gotten rid of the return sheet in Darby 3-3. This is the envelope from Upper Darby 3-3. We still have all of them. Inside. Here's the original return sheet with the wetting signature by the judge of elections and the minority inspector. We did preserve these. We do discard photocopies that were made to satisfy a request, but no, we did not get rid of the originals. We keep those for the statutory requirement. The statutory requirement in this case was September, early September. However, because as was referenced at the last meeting, there's one piece of litigation before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. All jurisdictions, as far as I know, are retaining the records from 2020.
Madam Chair, can I ask a couple questions just about the V drives? Because I know that's been something that has been, brought up. I mean, there's people out there that have made, wild allegations. The process would be that the judge of election puts the V drive, into the Tyvek envelope and puts it into the materials that get returned to Rose Tree Park, correct?
Yes, and as I understand it, the concern has been that it might be delivered some other way. For example, let's say.
Well, I'll get to that.
Okay.
But if it's done the proper way,
right,
the way we instruct the judge of elections to do it, those materials get returned with the election night materials back to Rose Tree Park. and then the Tyvek envelopes are retrieved, and that red bag that we saw that Ms. Carfagno had, is that issued by the Board of Elections, by the election staff?
Yes.
Okay, I mean, you know, that's not her Whole Foods bag that she just carries around, you know. That's a bag that's provided for that purpose.
I don't know from reviewing the video whether it's a Whole Foods bag, a Wawa bag, or a Board of Elections bag. I just know it's a red bag, so I can't speak to.
Right. And is Ms. Carfagno the employee who was assigned the duty of transporting the V drives from Rose Tree Park?
Yes, and she was,
delivering them to the
and
chief clerk,
each
Ms.
time
Hagan?
she was accompanied, her vehicle was accompanied by Park Police vehicle. And the Park Police officer, you can see from the beginning of the video, walked her into the building as well.
Right. And I don't know if we do it, but my suggestion might be just, again, to assuage any concerns that there be, you know, a record when she's at Rose Tree Park and she, you know, has 100 precincts worth of, you know, the V drives in the Tyvek envelopes, that it's recorded, you know, which 100 that she has received, and that gets dropped off to Ms. Hagan, and Ms. Hagan signs off on it as received. Like I said, I'm not sure if we do that now, but that might be a practice that, again, just to assuage anybody's fears, that, you know, we call that chain of custody. So that would explain the election night ones. In my experience also, you know, they do a terrific job, but not all the judges of elections return everything that they're supposed to, you know, in the proper container on election night. And again, in my experience in the past, some of the V drives and the, you know, in olden years, the cartridges that went into the old machines were returned along with or were left in the voting machine, you know, or returned that next day. Do we still have that issue that pops up?
It can, and we're trying to, you know, you try to address it with the precincts that made a mistake the last election, and you don't know that, you know, those might be the ones who make a mistake this election. But overall, you know, at the end of the day, such as this Darby 3-3, we also have the tapes to go back to that were supplied and printed out.
No, but I'm just saying,
Yeah.
I think it's always going to happen that you're of
28.
You know, you're going to get a handful of the judge of election doesn't feel well, he or she just went home that night, or, you know, whatever the case might be. But so when we do that, we first of all, on election night, we're able to identify the V drives that we don't have, correct? And typically we ask the warehouse to the voting machine department to take a look inside to see if they're there. And once again, the director or somebody takes those V drives when they're located, brings them to the wharf. And once again, I'd make the suggestion, we may already do it, but, you know, to record, hey, these 10, you know, I have, and Joe Smith carried them from the voting machine department and delivered them to Ms. Hagan, and she signs off on them, so that we sort of close that loop with, you know, the chain of custody, if we're not already doing that.
No, I agree. You know, a lot of what we build is aimed at getting the results out as quickly as possible, because any delay in the results causes people to ask questions. And so as much as that, you know, having Patty say, I brought in the following 100 precincts, and then having to present that to Lorene to verify, yeah, these are the 100 you brought in, might delay things. It might still, it'll still be worth it to add that documentation.
I understand, and I'm usually the one preaching that we have too many steps, but
yes, you
that might
do.
be something I just thought is that we may consider, you know, again, to assuage anybody's fears, you know, because this chain of custody has become the, you know, the issue that gets brought up sometimes.
I just want to point something else out with respect to these V drives. There's a lot of discussion of the V drive as some holy grail of election integrity. And I just want to remind people, this is at least triple safety. There's a belt, suspenders, and you know, I don't know, a rope. But the V drive is a copy of what's on the hard drive of the scanner. So it's no different than if you were to take a thumb drive and make a copy of what's on your laptop. If something happens to that thumb drive, it's still on the laptop, and the results are still on the hard drive of the scanner. In addition, you have paper ballots in a bag that will also be a form of backup. And we know from our recounts where we pull the paper ballots and count those ballots that these results have proven out with incredible accuracy, perfect accuracy really, including in countywide recounts like we had in the primary. And we also have the tapes. So there are 3 different ways that if somebody tried to manipulate that V drive, or God forbid the V drive was being driven to the warehouse or to Rose Tree Park for drop off, and there was a fiery crash and it incinerated all of the V drive, that there are series of backups in place in our system designed to account for that. There is no one holy grail that without that one thing, you lose election integrity. These things are all just have layers and layers and layers of redundancies to protect us.
That's right, but what I hear you saying, I know Ms. Hagan does check in off which V drives are accounted for.
She does log each and every one.
Right.
So the video, for example, showed her seated next to Ms. Wallace, and she would read off that we have, you know, Chester Heights, we have whatever sorry, I got Chester Heights on the brain, whatever, so that we also know, in addition to the reports that are going to be generated when we feed the V drives into the tabulation, or the central count, that we know which ones are outstanding.
Right, and there's not been redundancy of those. I mean, somehow magically there's been 2 for the same one that I've ever observed. But I think, Mr. McLean, are you suggesting that Ms. Carfagno have a list as well, so that she checks off what she collects?
Yeah, I think that.
I don't think that's a hard, right, that way that we have that list.
We've adopted that in the past. We have forms for that.
We may already be doing it, I'm just.
It's an added step we can either restore or implement for the first time. It hasn't been done since I was here, but certainly we can add that step. My frozen are pointing in the wrong location. There we go.
We're just deeply thinking about the added step that we've asked you to.
Next, there have been questions, statements about absentee and by mail and voter history. The applications have never exceeded either 40% of the eligible voters or the total ballots cast. There have never been more absentee mail-in ballots than there were applications. There have never been more ballots than eligible voters. Absentee mail-in ballots returned have never exceeded the number of applicants. Replacements were issued only after the initial envelope and ballot was canceled. So even if you got a replacement, if we ended up receiving both the first one and the second one, we would only count the second one. And there are safeguards. Exactly. Safeguards are in place to prevent voters from voting by mail and in person. So if the voter does not remit their ballot and their envelope, they're required to vote a provisional ballot in that instance. And then duplicate applications do occur. We have mass mailings from either political organizations or other outside groups who are trying to amplify, make sure that as many people apply to vote by mail or to register to vote. And we get duplicates of both. We don't process duplicates though. We log them, but we don't create a second vote by mail application for Joe Smith or a second voter registration for Joanne Smith. You know, the SURE system is the first place that we turn to make sure that we're either updating or adding a voter for the first time. We're not adding the same voter over and over again. There are problems with the idea of hand counting ballots. There are no systems in place. There have been no programs that have been tested or analyzed. The voting equipment that we have has been certified by first the Election Assistance Commission, the United States, and that was only after it received a vetting through an independent laboratory, meaning that the vendor has to pay for it but has no control over the independent laboratory's certification processes pursuant to the EAC's standards. And then that voting system was in turn certified by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the Department of State. There have been questions about whether or not this system, which was purchased in 2019, should be subject to the voluntary voting standards that have been adopted since then. Well, it would be impossible to design a system to meet a newer set of standards, so it's not, if we get another voting system or we get an upgrade that is approved by the EAC after those newer standards are in place, yes, it would have to be tested against those. But you don't go back and test the balloting equipment every time the standards are updated. So hand counts, as we know from our return board work, are inaccurate. The one sentence that jumps off the page, if you go to the return board report, is that anytime we found a discrepancy between the hand counts and the machine tape, it was due, we went back and we checked the hand count and it was wrong. Hand counts by definition break the chain of command. As I mentioned before, there's no standards for performing those. But also, if you think about opening the ballot box and now removing and spreading those out on a table.
I don't think Mr. Allen, we're thinking about that at this
Okay. And with that, I don't know if you have any additional questions, but.
I didn't see one thing that I thought was a really positive security measure, which is that check-in that happens when the bags are received from the judge of elections by your team at the wharf. I thought that was a very positive thing. If you could please explain that to those listening.
So at Rose Tree, and whether we use Rose Tree again is
wherever we use it,
wherever we have used an Airtable system. Again, the Airtable system is not in any way, shape, or form connected to any of the vote ballot processing or tabulation equipment. It's an entirely separate system, and the Airtable is a way of logging in real time which precincts were delivered. The V drive, as well as the ballot bag and the other supplies.
And they get logged in when they're initially dropped off, and then they get logged in, I thought, again at the wharf.
They get logged in manually at the wharf.
Thank you. Do you have any questions, Mr. Rickler?
The only other question I have, maybe you could just run us through the process of when a mail-in ballot, I fill mine out, I mail it back, where does it go to, and take me through where that ballot goes before it gets counted.
So the chain of custody, and if you were to use the U.S. Postal Service, means that it goes to that blue box or a postal station, and then the processors throughout the sorting system, everything else, the zip +4 identifier. We use a business reply mail system so that the postage is paid for the voter. And then it ultimately gets to the carrier, to get it to the voter. With getting it back to us, we pick it up at the Chester postal facility.
Right. So we bring the ballots to the Chester Voter Center, and the initial step is to run it through the Blue Wave or Blue Crest machine.
Yes.
And then where does it go? Where does it sit after it's been processed, and let's assume it's been accepted?
Right there, the Blue Crest equipment or the hand scan, whichever we need to use, Because if we produce an individual label over the counter, that's not going to be read by the Blue Crest. But if it goes through the Blue Crest and it's analyzed and checked in through the Blue Crest, it's first verifying that, A, do we have that voter? B, do we have an application from that voter? C, is this the only, and if not the only, the second envelope that was issued to that voter, so that we're not having a duplicate. And then we're able to use that to upload that day's returns to the Sure system. Similarly,
to be clear, this is before any ballot's been opened. This is just to document by barcode information on the envelope that something's come back.
This is to generate through the Sure system to allow, hopefully, the voter to see online, if they check, that the ballot envelope has been received by their jurisdiction, as well as allow any observers, political parties, other observers who receive the reports that you've requested, that these are the ones that have been returned as of this date.
Right, so once it's accepted, once it's checked in and accepted, where does it get stored?
We store it, we then go through the process of sorting it down to the precinct level, and then at the precinct level, alphabetized, so that it's in orderly fashion for Election Day. So it's stored in a locked ballot room at the wharf, which is under 24/7 camera surveillance, which we stream at election time on the internet.
And then what's done with those ballots in preparation for the pre-canvassing process on Election Day?
Well, the legal report will get more into that, but we're looking first to verify the basics. If it's not signed, it goes into an exception bin. If it's totally not sealed, it goes into an exception bin, meaning that it's not going to be able to be processed.
I don't
Right.
want to get down so minutiae.
I'm sorry.
If it's accepted, if it's, once it's accepted by us and checked in, I mean, take us through the process, because again, there's some organ grinders and there are chimps out there that talk about, people just roaming all over the city of Chester with, boxes of ballots. And I want you to explain what happens from the time that it leaves the room, the locked room where the ballots are stored, and are they taken out the morning of the election to begin the pre-canvass process, and then kept in the Chester Center? I mean, how do we do that?
Yes, they're brought out the morning of Election Day. We're not allowed to open any of the envelopes before Election Day. So they're brought out in their precinct trays to begin processing on Election Day. And the way to think of the central count equipment at the wharf is the same way that you think of the scanner at the precinct, in that you can begin processing ballots on Election Day, or in 38 other states, they start before Election Day, but you don't tabulate. Similarly, in the precinct, that scanner is turned on, they run a zero tape, and it's processing ballots throughout the day from all the different voters who come through, but it's not doing any tabulation until the polls close and you order it to tabulate and issue reports.
But just physically then, so that it runs through the scanner, it has the signature, it's sealed, it's not been put into an exceptions bin. What's the next step?
Next step is that we run it through the first opener to remove the secrecy envelope from the outer envelope, and then the outer envelope is run through a second cutter or the same cutter, if that works, to open up so that we can retrieve the ballots. Then the ballots are basically taken over to another table where they're flattened, and then they're taken over finally to the scanners where they're processed on high-speed scanners.
And what happens to the ballots after they've been processed and read?
They're placed back in bins based and batched with the batch report that basically says there was 100 ballots processed through this batch, or 200 ballots, or 50, or 1, and then they're placed in a bin that corresponds to that township or municipality.
And stored at the Chester Center.
And we continue to store them.
And this is the process that must be continuous.
This is the process that, once we begin election day morning, we have to continue until we've processed all of the ballots that legally are acceptable, meaning the post office brought them to us at or before 8 p.m., or they were put in drop boxes at or before 8 p.m., before those were closed down.
Does that answer your questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Solicitor?
Yes, thank you. Principal item that's the subject of my report this morning is that as you may be familiar, in prior elections, I think every election since I've been the solicitor, I have put together what you might call a white paper or guidance that would be used by the staff in terms of how to deal with various situations involving vote-by-mail ballots. And by that I mean, for example, a vote-by-mail ballot comes in and it's unsealed. What happens? A vote-by-mail ballot comes back and it doesn't have the voter's signature on it. What happens? And now the voter's address is printed on the ballot, but at least in the primary in 2020, if I recall correctly, there was a space for the voter to write their address in the ballot on the outer envelope. There's a sort of a voter declaration on there. What happens if the person doesn't write their address? Or what happens if the person writes an address and it's different from the address we have on record? So just kind of a little handy guide on what to do with various anticipated circumstances that could come up and what the law is on that. As we went to update that, of course, that is not a static item. Those types of things get dealt with over time with different court decisions. And of course, in the last couple of years, we have a number of court decisions because we have vote by mail for as a relatively new thing here in Pennsylvania, and a lot of court activities about those types of situations. And so we're getting updated court rulings and so forth about different scenarios. So we have to go back each year and before each election and look and make sure that our white paper is updated with the most accurate court cases and guidance. And in the process of doing that this year, we took a careful look at a case called Migliori versus Cohen. This is the Third Circuit decision that you will remember from earlier this year, where the Third Circuit ruled that a ballot that was a vote-by-mail ballot that was not dated had to be counted, and it would be a violation of federal law to not count that ballot. And so we looked at that decision, and the holding of that decision is frankly not limited to vote-by-mail ballots where there is no date. What that case says is that the law in question, 52 U.S.C. 10101A2B, mandates the counting of ballots containing immaterial errors or omissions. One such example that court concluded was an undated outer envelope, and says that by limiting, and it further says that material errors and omissions, that category is limited to those affecting whether an elector is qualified to vote under state law. And the court went on to explain that the only state law voting requirements that relate to an elector's qualifications are citizenship, residence, age, and felony status. So something related to those items are material. Other errors and omissions are not. And in thinking about what that case says about what federal law requires, I don't see that a ballot that is returned without the inner envelope, or what we sometimes call a naked ballot, that has nothing to do with the voter's qualifications as defined by the court, the Third Circuit in Migliori, we have to follow federal law. The Third Circuit governs Pennsylvania and New Jersey and Delaware. So that's the applicable court to tell, unless the Supreme Court of the United States tells us something different, that's the applicable court to tell us what federal law is. And that court says that the limits of, immaterial, or what material errors are limited to those items I described. That means that a ballot that doesn't have its privacy envelope, or a naked ballot, I think has to be counted under federal law and will be violating federal law if we don't count it, as the court has ruled in Migliori. So we are updating our white paper guidance to reflect that. Now, one thing, I recognize that that position could be disputed. I don't think that it's at all disputable under the language of Migliori, but I understand people may not agree with it. And recognizing that, and also recognizing that once you count a ballot in the rest of the universe of ballots, the egg is scrambled and it can't be uncounted, that I'm going to direct in the white paper that naked ballots be batched separately, they be counted in their own batch, so that upon, recognizing the potential that this issue could go to the United States Supreme Court potentially, and they could determine that Third Circuit was wrong, that if that were to happen, that those votes could be easily backed out and uncounted because they would be in their own freestanding batch. But I think that's what federal law pretty clearly requires after Migliori with respect to naked ballots.
And Mr. Solicitor, there are a couple instances where there could be a naked ballot issue, right? It's not just the...
That's correct. So there are two scenarios where you could have a naked ballot. One would involve vote by mail. That would include absentee or no excuse by mail. The other instance would be provisional ballots, which provisional ballots are, they're filled out by a voter at the polling place with the assistance and supervision of the poll workers at the polling place, particularly the judge of elections who signs the outer envelope of a provisional ballot, and the minority inspector is supposed to sign that envelope as well. The ballot is placed by the voter in a privacy envelope, which is then put inside that outer envelope with the various declarations and the name of the voter and the signature from the judge of elections and the signature from the minority inspector, again, assuming it's done correctly. But there again, you have the issue of the privacy envelope and whether the missing privacy envelope in that context would disqualify an otherwise valid provisional ballot. And again, I think that Migliori is clear that because that missing envelope doesn't go to citizenship, residence, age, or felony status, it would be a violation of federal law to not count that.
And I'll let you ask any questions you have in a second, but are there any other instances where you anticipate batching might be appropriate because of a highly disputed issue?
There may very well be. We would address that in the white paper. And we're continuing to work on that. We have a draft white paper that it's currently with me, and then I'm finalizing and updating. And we have some pending litigation right now in the Commonwealth Court that may address some issues that would conceivably pertain to what's in the white paper as well.
I mean, that batching, if there's likely to be disputed, even if you don't believe under the laws, it should be disputed. I think that batching is important.
Yes, agreed. And we've adopted that in prior elections. I think that that's the right and fair way to proceed and avoids the egg is scrambled and can't be unscrambled problems. And that's, of course, what the court ordered in the primary when the issue of the undated ballots was being debated. And, of course, then we had the Migliori decision and the Commonwealth Court decision. So as far as I can tell, undated ballots are, I don't think there's any need to batch them at this point because we have a Third Circuit ruling and a Commonwealth Court ruling telling us that those count. But that would be an example where if this board felt more comfortable batching undateds and sort of figuring out that maybe that could be an environment where there was an area for dispute, then we could easily do that.
I look forward to a chance to review your report or your paper, Mr. McLean.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't object or I don't disagree with the idea of sequestering or batching those. I haven't looked at this issue. I look forward to reading the paper. My recollection is that didn't the Pennsylvania Supreme Court decide differently?
They did, and that's what's interesting about this. We have not counted naked ballots in the pre-Migliori environment since the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled on that question in 2020. However, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court was not presented with the question of what federal law mandated, whereas the Third Circuit was, and with the supremacy clause, federal law governs over the state law here. So if under federal law, the court determines that it violates federal statutory law relating to elections, then that governs and that prevails. And I don't think that it's at all surprising the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled one way with the questions presented to it, and then the Third Circuit said, yeah, but there's this overlay of federal law, and you may think Pennsylvania says this, but federal law says no. So that's the way the court in Migliori described it, and so I think that it changes the landscape, and that's why I'm calling it to your attention.
Are we going to be the only county that
I don't know about that. I have not been in touch with any solicitor with any other county, but I would frankly be pretty surprised if I don't see how other solicitors in other counties could look at that Migliori decision based on how it's written and what it says and come to a different conclusion.
Because that obviously it's going to be the subject of litigation. So.
It almost, it depends frankly on how close the election is, probably. Whether it's subject to litigation, but that's why you batch it and sort it out. But I think we have an obligation to do what, to honor federal law here. And I think the Third Circuit's, the test they laid out is pretty straightforward about what we have to look at. And I just don't see a way that whether somebody put a ballot in a privacy envelope or not relates to citizenship, residence, age, or felony status. So I just don't think I think based on the methodology the court created, which is minor and immaterial or material, it's not in one of these 5 categories, so it means it has to be in the other category as a defect goes. And I do think they're practical. I mean, my understanding is Delaware County always counted naked ballots for many, many years up until the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled in 2020, and that they would just clothe those naked ballots. They would, as soon as they saw it was a naked ballot, they would put it in a privacy envelope so somebody couldn't see what was on the ballot, couldn't see what the votes were. And my understanding is that's the way that process was handled for many years.
I mean, that was back. I mean, it was open at the precinct.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So.
I think that is what happened, and they would be shuffled and some other things like that. That's my memory. Okay, thank you, Mr. Solicitor. Mr. Allen, the Dropbox status report, please.
So currently, we're still working on the camera at Marple. We had to relocate the Milbourne location, and that's been installed. But again, the camera needs to be installed. Aston is going to stay put. And that's all we have for right now.
And are there any campaign finance reports today?
No, there are not.
Mr. Allen, what's the proposed next meeting date?
It would be the 4th Tuesday again. We're 6 weeks out, though, from Election Day as we speak. So I probably will be consulting with the board members about having one within a couple of weeks or so. As needed.
Okay, Mr.
Yeah, Madam Chair, could I just go back and ask a question regarding the camera preparations, other camera preparations? So when we open the drop boxes and we have the recording devices now activated, is there any consideration of if somebody wanted to view one of the recordings, how would we get that accomplished?
The plan is to, and this will be the first time that we're performing this, is to capture it and store it on all of our own servers in the IT department, so that there is a permanent record of it. So I am presuming that we could provide copies of that, and it'll involve terabytes and terabytes of data, perhaps, after the election, or, as soon as it can practically be supplied.
Do we pick up the ballots that are in the drop boxes periodically prior to election day, right?
Right. We'll be opening only one drop box initially, and that's here at the government center on the 5th of October, or when we first mail out ballots. The network, because if you open up all 36, 39, 40 drop boxes, once you do that, you've got to start making regular pickups from those, and it's quite an extensive operation, and we just don't have the vehicles or the staff power to do that. So all of and this is pretty much the pattern you find in other counties that use drop boxes, is that you open up the community level drop boxes on 2 weeks, or in this case, 15 days before Election Day, which will be October 24th. So we'll have the drop box in case someone is about to head out of town here at the government center, but we're not going to open up all of the community drop boxes until October 24th.
So say I put my mail-in ballot in Alden. That's going to stay there until it's picked up election night.
No, we won't have the drop box open until the 24th. They're going to remain sealed shut, so the community drop boxes won't be open until the 24th of October.
But if he puts it in a community box, when will it be collected? When the community box is open?
So we're working on a schedule with the personnel department to try to make sure that we have adequate staffing and equipment, but presumably 3 to 4 times a week.
For that, so it would be open a couple of weeks.
Right. It would be open starting October 24th through Election Day itself, and then it would be sealed shut at 8 p.m.
Right.
on election.
Do we prepare any kind of report? I'm just these are the types of questions I get, and I'm just sort of relaying them. Do we prepare any sort of report, when we do pick them up, say from Alden, those 3 or 4 times, that say, we picked up, 200 ballots, 300 ballots, 200 ballots, because I think the idea is for those who want to try to make sure that there's not any sort of the illegal ballot harvesting going on, to look and see, are there red flags, and for me, like in Alden, if there were 1,500, ballots there, that would be a red flag. So if somebody, how would do we prepare any sort of report that anybody can take a look at to just look and see if there's any red flags or anomalies that people think might exist?
We do. There's a daily report that indicates when we make pickups from any drop box. So let's say we only get to routes A and B on Monday, but then we do C and D on Tuesday. Whatever routes we do cover, Ms. Flores prepares a spreadsheet that details how many were picked up from each drop box on that particular day, or if none were picked up from that day.
And also the ballots themselves are scanned in shortly thereafter, right?
Yes, the ballots are scanned in that afternoon or that evening.
In my experience, voters closely watch whether, when they dropped it in a drop box, whether or not it's been scanned and is received.
I know I did.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Anything else, Mr. McBlain?
No, thank
Mr.
you,
Allen
Chair.
or Mr. Parks? All right, then this meeting is adjourned. And now I call to order, I won't forget you, Ms. Winterbottom, you've waited so patiently, the Delaware County Board of Elections Voter Registration Commission meeting of September 27th, 2022.
Good morning. So I just wanted to share some statistics. As of yesterday at 12:30, I ran these numbers, which change by the minute. Yesterday, we have 412,000 registered voters. We've seen a really large influx of registration drives coming in, where we're actually very, very short on forms, and so is the state. So we've been printing our own off. We're still waiting for some. The state's still also waiting for their shipment to come in. So this report that I ran was from the day after the last day to register from the primary, which would be May 3rd or 4th,
Day after the primary, May 18th.
the last day to register.
Oh, last year, yes, you're right.
So all those forms that we processed. So the total apps that we processed were 36,247. 11,306 were new. 8,919 were address changes. 1,643 were name changes. 3,147 were political party changes. The other 11,232 were applications that could have been declined as a duplicate, also canceled and moved out of county, also pending applications. So talking about our pending, especially with the registration drive, I know I spoke with Mr. Allen about a lot that we've seen where their HAVA notice sent, which are letters that are sending whether the name, birthday, social, or driver's license doesn't match. We're seeing a lot more of those. So right now, from that date to yesterday, we have 718 that are in a pending status for a HAVA notice sent. We also have 306 in a pending status that cannot be precinct, whether it was a business address, whether we don't have that address. We have 423 applications in a pending status that are missing information. Could be dorms. Some colleges in Delaware County do need dorm names. We've seen a lot of the colleges fill out the forms correctly. Like Villanova splits into about 4 different precincts, so we need that dorm name to put them in the correct precinct. A lot of the college students have been putting them on. So it could be missing information such as they didn't sign it, or they didn't put their birthday, or they didn't put the driver's or social. Sometimes when you apply online and you don't have the capability of putting in your driver's license, where PennDOT attaches your signature to the online and it comes electronically to us, those voters are sent what we call a pending missing signature. Until that letter gets back to us and we can upload that signature, it's in a pending status. As of yesterday, we still have 545 in a pending missing signature waiting for those letters to come back. Going to the beginning of the year, January 1st, we have canceled for deceased, whether it was Department of Health or a letter from the family or something, if we send a card or a correspondence, that family is sending it back saying that they're deceased. We have deceased approximately 3,500 voters from January 1st of this year. In January also, we sent out 12,255 5-year notices. These are all 12,255 of these voters got what we call a 5-year notice. They are all put in inactive status until they respond to us. Whether everything's fine, we'll reactivate them. Inactive voters are still eligible voters on election day or in the poll book. They would just have to sign an affirmation. And then in the summer, we do our ERIC mailing, which we sent out 12,672 letters. I think about a month ago when I checked our reports when we closed it out, or I think it was in August, we had at that time 8,000 that did not respond between the 5 different letters. Those are also put on an inactive status, and most of them also get a secondary letter, which we call the address verification notice. They are still coming back now where they're updating their address, and we're still processing those, but it has been closed out where they get that secondary address verification notice. And I think I covered mostly where we're at today.
Your team's been busy.
We are very busy. For the last couple of years, we were pretty good in voter registration because a lot of people utilize the online voter registration tool, which we like. It's we don't have to try to read the form or how a letter is from the voter when they spell their name and scan it in and type in all that information. So the online really helps us. We have more of a backlog of paper forms now. And we haven't really seen that since before 2020. Mm-hmm. So we have a lot.
Well, there's very little public still remaining here, and I don't know if anybody's still listening, but it is not necessary, right, to fill out a duplicate application. If you fill out one and then you want to validate that it's been received by your office, that would be a better course, perhaps, than providing you with duplicates you mentioned.
Yeah, and I mean, every form, no matter, even if it's just a name and a birthday and there's no address, no social, we have to enter every single form. We type in, we scan every form, whether it's just one letter on it and, you know, maybe a signature as incomplete. You know, we enter everything that we receive. So if it's a duplicate, it's just another process. But we're seeing more paper forms and registration drives, and seeing that we're almost out of forms, and so is
That
this.
part's good, right? We want to see more people register.
Yeah, and so in the state's also out of registration forms, or very low at least. So we like to get the online. They go through a lot quicker for us.
Thank you. Mr. McLean, any questions? No.
So we'll be encouraging at the deadline voters to go online if they need to update their registration or register for the first time, but also encourage voters not to send Ms. Winterbottom and her staff duplicate forms. And if they want to just check their status, they can go to pavotes.com/status. pavotes.com/status. I realize it's a .gov site, but that's a shortcut that still works and takes you to the .gov site. So because we want people to check, make sure they're still registered at their address, but not go through the process of, you know, registering when they're already registered.
Is there any public comment on the report? Okay, then anything else from anybody else?
I move to adjourn.
With that, this meeting is also adjourned. Thank you, Ms. Winterbottom.
Thank you.
Well, I did. I contributed a lot.